Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism and narcissistic relationships and healing from them. And today, I'm going to be doing a little riff on a TV show that I know many of you are watching, and probably one of the most extraordinary episodes of it. You'd say, oh, but Dr. Ramani, you said Succession was the be-all, end-all. I thought that was the case, and let me tell you, I thought, how am I going to find a show like Succession? The Bear, folks. The Bear is every bit as, to me, as worthy a show as Succession. In some ways, I like it better because the approachability, the world that these folks live in, like these are the people I know, right? And so it's not like this gilded palaces, private jet nonsense. Like these are the folks you know. And so my YouTube team turned me on to this. And oh my goodness, it is, I know a lot of people are watching it. A lot of people are loving it. I think it's a phenomenal, fantastic, incredibly acted, incredibly written show. But you know, if I'm talking about the show, there's some sort of narcissism twist. The characters here are so interesting to me. They're so nuanced and they're so complex that I'm not even going there. But let's talk about the episode. I have to tell you, might have been one of the most, you want to understand what an antagonistic, emotionally abusive parent does to their kids. This show makes Logan Roy look like he's a little league dad, okay? So let's talk about this episode. It is episode 6 of season 2 called Fishes. Okay, so the scene is, let me set the scene. Those of you who are watching The Bear, I don't even think that episode's a spoiler. It's interesting. It's an entire episode focused on the family of origin of the chef. The premise of the show, and I'm not giving anything away because it's the premise of the show, is that there's 3 siblings in a family. One of them, one of the brothers, ends his life. And upon his suicide, his other brother, who is a James Beard, Michelin-starred, one of the best chefs in the world, leaves his big job in New York City and comes back to take on this sandwich shop that was left to him by the brother who had ended his life. And they also have a sister. Moves back to Chicago. And Chicago is such a magnificent, beautiful city. So just the shots of Chicago are gorgeous too. So that's the premise. And it's very clear as you're watching this first season, something really messed up is going on in this family. So in this particular episode in season 2, you're at this family's house for Christmas. It was very painful to watch, very painful to watch. And I thought to myself, anyone who is a survivor of a emotionally abusive, emotionally dysregulated, or severely narcissistic parent, or any kind of antagonistic. Back in the day, we used to call it cluster B, that entire cluster of personality issues, psychopathy and sociopathy and borderline and narcissistic and histrionic, all those things that stuck together. It was a cluster B, and that's Mom, played brilliantly by Jamie Lee Curtis, by the way. So Mom is as dysregulated a mother as you're ever going to see on a show. She's the mother to the Michelin-starred chef. It's a flashback episode. So the brother who ultimately does end his life is alive in the episode. So you have all 3 siblings present. This episode hit. Mom's behavior is actually not even that interesting. She was screaming, she was yelling, she was dysregulated. She was attempting to make this really elaborate Christmas dinner, using sort of these motifs of like the 7 fishes, because the family originally immigrated from Italy, and all these other things. And there's all these alarms going off, which they used as such a great device because it was like this classical conditioning. The mom was losing it every time an alarm went off. But what you saw with her 3 adult children was really what happens when a person grows up with this dysregulated and abusive a parent. Because we've got to assume that this is how this parent always was, and was exactly like this when they were kids. And the way the scene was going, it's clear that this is how this person always was. The mother always was like this. So what you have now, and the effects on the 3 siblings was fascinating. The eldest sibling, okay, so being exposed to this abusive mother, again, deeply dysregulated, and very, very victimized. She was constantly, nobody appreciates me. Nobody sees how hard I work. Nobody takes care of me. Why doesn't anyone appreciate me? She was constantly manipulative and guilting the one son who'd gone off to become the award-winning chef. He's too good for us. He doesn't want to come here anymore. You never call. You never come. I'm like, of course he doesn't call and come here. So there was a lot of that. The daughter carries a nickname, Sugar, which is a constant humiliation of her. The mother gave her that nickname because the mother had said that once upon a time the girl had her true name, the character's name is Natalie, but had put sugar where salt was asked for in a recipe and ruined the recipe. And from that day on, it happened when she was a little girl, they called her Sugar. So even this poor woman's nickname is just a constant sort of degradation of her, but they still kept using it. Everyone was using that nickname for her. So that's the mom. So these kids were constantly, her adult kids now, you imagine as small children, they were constantly having to attune to the mother's moods, constantly having to appease her, constantly having to walk like they were like tiptoeing through a place where there were bombs going off constantly. They were constantly on edge. And it was interesting because what the daughter struggled with most was, should I ask her if she's okay? And this was one of the most, perfect way they captured this, and tragic, that when the daughter asked the mother, is she okay? You got to keep in mind, the mother is dropping stuff on the floor, wailing, screaming, threatening to shoot herself. This is not someone who's stable. And when the daughter asks her if she's okay, the mother loses it. How dare you ask me if I'm okay? You're not asking anyone else if they're okay. So it really captures that even in their most dysregulated states, people with these personalities don't like their behavior being pointed out to them. But again, it was the effect on the children. So we know that that eldest son, Michael, he ends up ending his life. That is how much traumatic damage, in part, that this kind of a substrate would create. You could see that this particular son, Michael, was a seething ball of rage. He was like a volcano that was always about to go off. But then that would be offset with this gentleness, a gentleness that he would show with, so he'd either be rageful or he would be crying. And that dichotomy was very much something we might have expected from this sort of chaotic, being around this chaotic a mother. And he still lived with the mother. So he was still being exposed to the mother's absolutely unhinged behavior. We find out also that this brother was an addict. We find that very early in the show. So you have these histories with regulation, emotional regulation. He himself is trying to manage it through addiction. He's getting into fights with people at the table. It was like, again, he was a human powder keg. That was one of the siblings. The other sibling is the girl, the woman now, who was nicknamed Sugar, who was in so much anxious pain. She really, really looked like a survivor of complex trauma. And the actress did an amazing job of portraying that tension and that wide-eyed fear. You could almost feel her sitting in that clenched up way. She felt that she had to keep checking in with the mom, right? That what we see when a person has a narcissistic parent, the child has to attune to the parent's needs. The child has to check in on the parent's needs. And she felt compelled to do that. Even when her brothers were saying, don't do it. Don't check in with her. We know it's all going to go off the rails no matter what. But she almost couldn't stop. It was almost like a compulsion. And you could see that for her must have been an early attachment touchstone to be able to check in, is mom okay? Because that was, again, mom had to be okay. If you're going to survive as a child, the caregiver had to be okay. Clearly, your mom wasn't. Mom also appeared to be, I don't know if mom was an alcoholic, but that particular night, I think she'd already put away 2 bottles of wine. But she sort of had an alcoholic vibe as well. So now you have the daughter is extraordinarily anxious and really struggles. We see this early in the show with the grief around her brother and feels very unseen with it, and is much more raw with her emotion. Then we have, who is really sort of the main character of the show, is the chef, the world-renowned chef that he becomes. I find his character, I have to say, I have not seen a character I've been this fascinated by, I think, since Logan Roy. But the reason this particular character, Carmen is his name, is so compelling is when I first started watching the show, obviously we don't get to see this look at his family until well into season 2. But he had all the feel to me of a survivor of narcissistic abuse, and I couldn't figure it out. I'm like, what is this about with this guy? Because he's captured it. So hats off to that actor for capturing that kind of that tension. It was and we start to see the reason he became a Michelin-starred chef, one of the best chefs in the world, was he was almost obsessive and compulsive. It was his attention to detail. He would do things and get them right. There was a precision, but I can only call it obsessive and simultaneously, obsessive and compulsive. Not that he had OCD, but it was obsessive. And that obsessiveness in the world of elite chefdom made him one of the best in the world. Many survivors of these kinds of dysregulated, invalidating environments, they go on to become so obsessive, focused on whatever it is they focus on. It could be anything. It could be being a chef. It could be being a musician. It could be being, I don't know, a lawyer, a doctor, an academic, a teacher, even the hobbies they have. And you can see how that becomes a safety behavior too, attempting to seek control in a world that was completely out of control. But one thing we also see in this Carm character is he has a relatively restricted range of emotion. Now, when we meet him, he's going through the acute grief following the death of his brother and being left this restaurant and it upending his life and him moving back to the city. He didn't have to take the restaurant, but he felt called to do it. He felt compelled that he had to make something of it as almost an homage to his brother. But he was... There is a grief that seemed to go beyond the grief around his brother, that this restricted range of emotion that we do sometimes see, again, in survivors of not only complex trauma, but also of severe narcissistic abuse in childhood. And this is what severe traumatizing narcissistic abuse looks like. And so as the show goes on, you see this, you see him. He doesn't have human relationships outside of work. He doesn't have a girlfriend. He doesn't seem to have any friends. He lives alone. He works obsessively, but we see him crack. We do see him every so often have an episode of absolute dysregulated rage where he hurts someone. But Carm, the character, has tremendous empathy. He feels bad for those he hurt. He tries to make it right in the best way he can. And probably one of the most brilliantly crafted interactions in a show, we see a scene of him talking with his sister. His sister is so hurt about why he never asks how she's doing. And he says, and it was so striking to me, he says, I don't have feelings, so I don't stop to consider how other people are feeling, and I see that, and I'm sorry. So there was a awareness that he took ownership and didn't feel narcissistic. It felt post-traumatic. The other thing the show does brilliantly is it shows that what sometimes can look like narcissistic manifestations, how they actually really link more into trauma and how it's very different than narcissism. But to watch where he came from, that this kind of the chaos and the dysregulation and the needing to attune to the mother. You could see he was constantly trying to appease the mother. It's going to be okay, Mom. Let me help you, Mom. And there's a brilliant scene in season 1 where somebody refers to his mother about something and his hand goes into a very rapid tremor. It was, that one scene could have been a film. Just watching that family, but the reason that the scene has so much power is now you've watched these people through all these other episodes and you've come to care about the characters and you watch their disintegration. But that episode, I have to tell you, in terms of the harm that a parent who puts their needs ahead of their children's, expects the children to take care of them, walks around perpetually as a victim, is deeply dysregulated, and what it does, and the different effects it has on 3 siblings in one family, was to me a literal masterclass on what this kind of, again, what we used to call cluster B kind of parent can do to someone. So If you haven't watched the show, listen, I ain't getting paid by Hulu. I'm telling you now, just as I was so hot on Succession, I think I might be hotter for this show because I think it also captures something that more of us can relate to because it's happening at a level that resembles regular people's lives. Check it out. But when you get to that episode 6, do some breathing and ground yourself. It is not easy to watch, but it is absolute genius. So them's my thought on The Bear. I cannot wait for them to come out with a season 3. Thanks again.